Good morning. It is Friday, the 3rd of July. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your daily update of European news and analysis, live here on Euronews. Coming up, the EU is preparing fresh sanctions against Russian military producers following Moscow's deadly assault on Kiev this week. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas says the measures will target entities supporting Russia's military-industrial complex after one of the largest aerial attacks of the war that killed at least 30 people and injured more than 100. Meanwhile, in Spain, around 1.2 million undocumented migrants have applied for legal status under a scheme that would grant them a one-year residence and work permit. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said the huge number of applicants reflects how necessary the scheme is, defying a growing European crackdown on irregular immigration. And in Brussels, a leaked European Commission document alleges the previous Hungarian government was running a spy network targeting EU staff between 2012 and 2018. Hungary's EU Commissioner Oliver Verhelyi has come under pressure to step down. But first, to Ukraine, who's holding a day of mourning today after at least 30 people were killed and more than 100 injured after a large-scale Russian missile and drone strike on Ukraine's capital. As the search and rescue operation continues, President Zelensky has called on allies to deliver the air defence systems that they promised. For more on the impact of one of Russia's largest aerial assaults in recent months, we're joined here in the studio by our Ukraine correspondent, Sasha Vakalina. Sasha, this was a major assault. The death toll keeps rising. Will we see more like this in the near future?
Look, the search and rescue operation is still on, Maeve, even now this morning in Kiev. Unfortunately, yes, we are probably going to see more of this devastation. The Kremlin did not hide the intentions yesterday, commenting on the attack, saying that Moscow intends to continue. It doesn't intend to stop and wants to increase what they call pressure to achieve Russia's goals in its war against Ukraine. Now, to do so, Russia is deliberately using some of the weapons that Ukraine is harder to intercept. These are the jet-powered drones and, of course, the ballistic missiles. There were 28 ballistic missiles used to attack Kiev in this devastation, which is, of course, overwhelming for Ukraine's air defense. And this is what Volodymyr Zelensky had to say.
Russia
no longer has any other argument in favor of its war, apart from its ballistic missiles, this kind of terror. Putin intends to continue winning against residential buildings to avoid ending this war. And this can be countered by both sufficient supplies of anti-ballistic systems and by significantly speeding up efforts to develop our own anti-ballistic systems in Europe.
President Zelensky there highlighting how these growing challenges now that are facing Ukraine's air defence systems. What's next then?
Well, he also said that, for example, to be able to intercept 70 ballistic missiles launched by Russia, Ukraine would need 140 of interceptors. This is the double. Just to give you an example, the US, the producer of the interceptors for Patriot systems, can only produce up to 65 per month. So this is not enough. Also considering that there is not only Ukraine, but also the war in Iran, which depleted those stocks. And this is why, indeed, Kyiv is calling on the partners, and we've heard from Ukraine's defense minister, who is calling on up to 40 Ukraine partners to speed up to those deliveries of the promised air defense. This is something that Ukraine partners already pledged to deliver, but these deliveries have been delayed. Hopefully, this is something that Kyiv can also raise at the NATO summit in Ancara next week.
OK, Sasha Vakalina, thank you so much for that update. And indeed, moving on, this latest attack in Ukraine comes on the eve of that very NATO summit taking place in Ancara next week. The US President Donald Trump has confirmed he will be attending, despite ongoing divisions within the alliance, particularly over the US war on Iran. For the latest, we can now head to the NATO headquarters here in Brussels, where our correspondent Shona Murray is standing by for us. Shona, you'll be heading, of course, to Ankara next week. Ahead of that, just tell us what is on the agenda.
Well, good morning, Maeve. And I spoke to one NATO diplomat last night and I asked him about next week. And he said it's showtime. It's time for NATO to prove to the United States that those countries are well on their way to spending 5% of GDP on defence by 2035, as agreed at the last NATO summit. We know this is a major bone of contention for the United States. We heard from the US ambassador to NATO during the week, Matthew Whitaker, who used the term free riders when it comes to some European countries and American military assets. Also on the agenda for sure will be America's long-term commitment to the NATO alliance, to European security architecture. We know that the United States has pulled a lot of capabilities available to NATO, like B-52 bombers, F-16s, F-35s. And in addition, there will be a real push for the defence industry to basically ramp up production and spend more and build more weapons. Maeve?
And of course, Shona, President Trump has been expressing his anger now for months with allies for not helping the US over Iran. I imagine this topic will also dominate in Ankara.
No doubt about it, Maeve. We even heard from Donald Trump last night on Truth Social saying that European countries abandoned the United States when it came to the war in Iran. He's talking about the fact that some countries like Italy, like Spain, refused access to the US military to their bases in those countries for the war in Iran. The UK did so initially, but then it allowed the US there. Other countries like Germany have always allowed the United States basing rights. So the picture isn't as clear-cut as he said, but he's certainly angry about this. And I caught up with his former US ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker, and I asked him about this situation and Trump's anger.
Donald Trump is always raging about something, and he's unhappy about European contributions, European defense spending, Iran, whatever it might be. But this is not going to be a blow-up of a NATO summit. It's actually going to be quite calm. First, I think he has a good relationship with Erdogan, and he doesn't want to rain on Erdogan's parade. Second, he is happy about NATO allies spending more on defense. And I think allies will say something nice about wanting to support security in the Persian Gulf when there's an opportunity to do so, trying to position themselves as helpful. And I think they're also going to try to take some positive steps on Ukraine, reaffirming this Pearl mechanism, the way in which Europe buys armaments from the United States and provides them to Ukraine.
And what of that business of NATO being important for the United States to project its own power globally? Has that diminished somewhat, or is it still important?
Well, so the administration right now likes to say that Europe wasn't there for us. They weren't helping. They didn't let us use bases and airspace and things like that. That's a bit of an exaggeration. You had to ask, and then you could have used them. And we didn't tell anybody we were going to attack Iran, and then we complained that no one was attacking with us. So I think it's a bit much the way that is packaged. Now, that being said, it has become politically beneficial to some countries in Europe to say they're standing up to Trump and that they aren't allowing their bases or space to be used to attack Iran. But that is now, that's a dynamic that was created by the U.S. surprise attack without consulting with anybody.
From an industry point of view, because that's really going to be a focus for the first day of the summit, this industry forum, what is required of NATO countries in terms of the industry stepping up, given the fact that the United States burned through so many munitions, including Patriot systems and so on?
Well, this is a great question because it starts with the money. You've got to be spending enough money on defense to have the capability that you need. But then, as Secretary Rutte has said in his Oval Office meeting, the trick is converting money into capability. You can spend money on a lot of things, and it doesn't necessarily produce defense capability. So getting a real defense capability that you need is not so straightforward. And then finally, we have to learn some lessons from Ukraine. Ukraine has developed high-tech, low-cost systems that are very effective and can overwhelm high-tech, high-cost systems. For example, if you spend a Patriot missile, it costs $1 million, to shoot down a drone that costs $30,000, that's an unsustainable position to be in.
Meanwhile, in Ireland, which has just taken over the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union, one question is looming large this week. Should it stop exporting alumina to Russia? Under pressure from Kiev, Dublin is investigating whether the material could be supporting Russia's war effort, while of course weighing the impact on local jobs. Our Jorge Librero sent us this update from Cork.
To sanction or not to sanction, that is the dilemma that Ireland faces when it comes to alumina, the white powder that it sells every month to Russia. We must remember that alumina is the raw material that it's used to manufacture aluminum, a lightweight metal that is commonly found on the battlefield in Ukraine. Now, President Zelensky has made it clear he wants these alumina exports to stop immediately, but the government of Ireland is treading carefully, balancing the pros and cons of such a decision. On the one hand, Dublin doesn't want any Irish material to end up propping up Russia's war machine. But on the other hand, Dublin is concerned about the potential disruption for local jobs, for the environment, and for Europe's broader supply chain. The government has already launched an investigation to determine the final destination of these alumina exports. Taoiseach Micheál Martin told us here in Cork that these findings will be shared with the European Commission to develop a joint approach that could tackle what he called the core issue. Now, I must say that the European Commission, the whole college, is here today in Cork to mark the start of the Irish presidency of the EU Council, a presidency that has been partially overshadowed by the damaging scandal of alumina.
Jorge Labradero there reporting from Cork in the south of Ireland. And now for the view from the UN on bringing an end to the war in Ukraine and other conflicts across the world. Our correspondent Angela Scugin spoke with the former Belgian Prime Minister Alexander De Croo, who's now with the UN Development Programme.
Stopping the war would, from our perspective, be the thing we look forward to. Of course, what is a just way of stopping the war? That is a political discussion. UNDP is not involved in that. But of course, war is development in reverse. And the human misery and the level of destruction in Ukraine is something which we deplore, and the huge human cost. I mean, there's every month 40,000 people are dying, and on the Russian and on the Ukrainian side. The earlier it stops, the earlier we can bring human progress again. But the political process is obviously one which we are a spectator in.
Absolutely. And shifting to another conflict now in the Middle East, the United Nations released a report this month stating that Israel is deliberately targeting Palestinian children in what they described as a genocide. You were in Gaza in February this year. Does this chime with what you saw on the ground?
And the circumstances on the ground are dramatic, and I have not seen many worse places in the world than Gaza today. More than 80% of people lost their homes, live in constructions that one would not even call tents. The level of poverty is gigantic, and they're being squeezed together in a surface that is less than 50% of what Gaza used to be, and it was already a very, very densely populated part of the world.
The European Commission wants to prioritise competitiveness and defence as part of this pitch, but does that mean that funding for aid will go under the hammer? Is there a clear winner and loser?
I think what the current proposal, or what the Commission has come forward with, is that it understands that the prosperity, the security and the stability of the European inhabitants is secured by what is being done within the European borders, but also what is being done outside the European borders. Having a stable neighborhood where there is economic growth, where there is democracy, where there is no war, has a direct impact on the lives of Europeans, and has also a direct impact on the economic growth that can happen. And so that is our main element: is development is part of your security agenda, and development is also part of your economic agenda. And these are two sides of the same coin.
But how do you muster support for this? Because obviously Russia's invasion of Ukraine is raging into its fifth year. Obviously tensions in the Middle East show no signs of abating. How do you fight fatigue when it comes to showing support to these countries and these communities that are being significantly impacted by conflict?
Well, we see more military spending, and we totally understand that in the current circumstances. But if you want that military spending to be as effective as possible, you will also have to invest in preventing that a conflict arises.
Alexander De Croo there speaking to our Angela Scugins on the sidelines of the EU budget conference. But now moving on, investigators from the EU's Public Prosecutor's Office have launched a major probe into the alleged misuse of EU funds by the far-right political group the Patriots. Our Jakub Janis explains what exactly they're accused of.
The dark times are ahead as the EU is coming for the Patriots. But this time it is not about political debate. It is about balance sheet. This week, the European Public Prosecutor's Office has launched a fresh wave of raids across France, Spain, Italy and Belgium. And they are digging into the 4.3 million euros of the EU funds allegedly misused by the European Parliament's Identity and Democracy Group between 2019 and 2024. What is going on here? The prosecutors are scrutinizing whether the party breached public tender rules when awarding public contracts and issued irregular donations using taxpayer funds. But that political group is actually dead. It has been rebranded into the new Patriots for Europe coalition, led by the rising star Jordan Bardella. And they are not a small fry, as they are currently the third largest force in the European Parliament. So the name on the office door has changed, but the paper trail remains. And the European prosecutors are conducting searches at the offices and homes of communication providers tied to that old group. Last year, when the investigation was announced, Bardella claimed it was a new harassment operation by the European Parliament. But here's the thing. The timing for the national rally, so Bardella's party, could not be more brutal. Next week, Marine Le Pen discovers if a Paris court will uphold a 5-year ban from public office on allegations of embezzling public funds. And if she's out, Bardella is the designated successor. So one question remains. Will the national rally maintain its political momentum? After all, the party relies on its image as the voice of the people against the distant Brussels elite. So let's hope that the very Brussels money was not used cynically to fuel their political machine all along. Because that would be a bummer, wouldn't it be?
Jakub Janis there for us. And now it's time for our World Cup segment. Well, drama and triumph in 2 European encounters. Portugal, with their superstar Ronaldo, bet Croatia in a pretty tight match 2-1. Spain won 3-0 against Austria. And both Iberian teams will be facing each other now in the biggest clash of the round of 16 on Monday. Switzerland also progressed to the round of 16 with a 2-0 win over Algeria this morning. And coming up, there are 3 more matches in this round of 32. Australia against Egypt this evening, and Lionel Messi's Argentina against the surprise team of Cape Verde at midnight, and then Colombia against Ghana in the very early hours of Sunday morning. So just at this stage, a recap: Austria, Bosnia, Croatia, Germany, Netherlands, Norway and Sweden are all out, and Belgium, England, France, Portugal, Spain and Switzerland made it to the round of 16. Enjoy the games. And if you're not a football fan, you may be more interested in Taylor Swift's wedding, which, given her huge fan base here in Europe, is sure to garner a lot of attention as well. Whatever your preference, you can visit euronews.com for all the latest news. But that does bring this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for your company. As always, take care, and we'll see you very soon here on Euronews.